compared to 2022. I cannot make an assessment of the 4 trillion for this year or those period because I'm dealing with facts. 63.8 billion and burning it because that's what goes to, it's just like, when you burn it, it's in the exhaust, okay? It's basically that we're really wasting that particular resource. Why? Because there is no way you can seal your border. Okay? If I provide a subsidy here in the economy and across the border there is a threefold differential in price, it will go to that, and there is no enough security men to tackle a problem in which a fiscal incentive you're offering, rather than just taking away the incentives. And there are ways to direct that money, and that's the point that I will give credence to. That there are ways you can direct that money, whether it is in terms of our neighbors, simply because you've created an economic incentive to do so. So I am saying Nigeria is basically a poor country. It's potentially rich, but you cannot run these levels of deficit. So can you just imagine if you had the 63.8 billion US dollars? We will not be in the position we are in today with the inflation rates, etc. So you cannot run this kind of huge debt. So my point is, if you want subsidy and you see there is a benefit, I don't see the benefit right now, but if you want the subsidy, raise taxes to close the fiscal cliff that we are in. That is the point. So if you want it, it's been authorized now. But somebody has to go and raise enough money to cover the gap. The fiscal gap is just too wide, and there is a consequence to it, and that consequence will not go well for the Nigerian economy. That's just the point. So if you want the subsidy, you can't have 7.35 trillion deficit, for goodness sake. This country used to run on 4 trillion naira for the entire budget. Now the deficit is even more than that. So it has all kinds of economic consequences, and I think you've raised the capital. The second point that I really want to make is that oil is a pollutant. We must understand what it is, and the government has taken the kind of right approach to dealing with things that have negative consequences, where you have a negative social effect. So, for example, a good example is the taxes that have been increased now on fizzy drinks. Okay? So you cannot have a pollutant be without any form of taxes. Instead, we are subsidizing it. Go to parts of the Niger Delta and you see what oil has done. Somebody needs to clean this up. To clean it up, we need to tax petroleum. We must tax petroleum because it's essential that it's called Peruvian taxes. This is widely known, and the government took the approach in the case of sugar and the diabetes epidemic that we are facing now. It's a social consequence. Just as you tax cigarettes, you tax alcohol. We must deal with the problem of the negative economic consequences of oil. And I think that is where you need to close this fiscal loophole by basically taxing it and removing this subsidy that is causing huge environmental damage to our country, the consequences of which we're just kicking the ball down the road.
Okay, Dr. Okon, let me still stick with you before I come back to Dr. Ozoyesa. Do you agree that this is a very tricky situation, even for the government? Because the government has also been dilly-dallying. President Muhammadu Buhari signed the PIA last year, and by February of this year, it was expected that subsidy would be over. The Minister of Finance did tell me in the World Bank Business Unusual that I moderated in December that, okay, by June we hope to take off the subsidy, they were going to pay allowances and all of that, but from everything that we're looking at now, it's not going to be possible because the National Assembly has said they'll be paying $4 trillion. It's a very tricky situation. Do you also agree that if the government takes off the $4 trillion, or if the government takes off the fuel subsidy, there will be macroeconomic challenges, inflation, prices of goods will go up, because normally that's what even in Nigeria we just say, if transfer prices go up, it should stop every other thing.
Well, I'm not a spokesman for, I'm sure I'm surprised the Minister of Petroleum is the Minister of State, as the case may be, is not here. He would speak officially on behalf of government. I am the petroleum economist, and my assessment of this is the impact it would have on basically general revenues of the state. We cannot afford, Nigeria cannot afford this sort of fiscal deficit. There is a huge gap, and it has what is called in economics the crowding out effect. So if the state is borrowing this type of money, the productive sector will not receive any sort of support. Why? Because it's the state that is borrowing. They have the printing presses. So a bank would be more likely to give money to someone who is sure would pay, would pay back, rather than take a risk in productive ventures. So there is a crowding out effect that this poses, and economic growth would really be affected dramatically. So I'm just simply saying that this is not a very targeted way in which you want to subsidize certain activity. You need to go to the productive sectors of the economy. I can see an investment in education, for example, in healthcare. Look at Ghana. Ghana has a 12.5% Peruvian tax, and it's used to fund the National Health Insurance Scheme in Ghana. So these are not new concepts. It's just that there's an emotional, almost very passionate display when it comes to subsidies, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says petrol in Nigeria should be given to anyone for free. All I'm saying is that if you choose to spend money, if you prioritize this spending, then you need to close the budget gap. It's not sustainable. That is just the economic consequences would be there.
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to, let me start from the one I find most interesting. That's the environmental impact. And I agree completely that if we're thinking dynamically, we should actually be looking for a way to move away from fossil fuels and look for more environmentally friendly energy types. But that is not something you do just by a tweak of the finger. You must create alternative means, alternative energy sources. Once those are on ground, yes, you can use pricing or taxing to try to win people away from this environmentally damaging energy commodity to other more sustainable type of energy. But to do that, an economy that already has, for instance, for transportation, infrastructure like urban mass transit, rail systems, that people are calculating in their head, do I drive my car to work or do I go on the train? When you already have that type of system, then I agree completely with you, sir, that you need to use tax to move people away from petroleum to others. But when you do not have those alternatives, it is clearly not possible, and it is not even advisable from the point of view of the sustenance of the economy. That is the first item. The second item I thought I should respond to. You know, we as economists generally, theoretically we take certain things out of the textbook and we think it is just applicable across the board. When you talk of crowding outside, the crowding out that we deal with in economics, what is the mechanism? When government goes into the borrowing market, it drives up the interest rates. It is that rise in the interest rates that crowds out the private sector. The private sector then finds it too expensive to borrow. But look at our empirical evidence. What is the interest rate regime that we have today? As a matter of fact, in the last 2 years, interest rates crashed. Whether it is in the money market or wherever, you find that deposit rates have gone to 3%. When before you could do 15, you could do 17% and all that. And that in a properly functioning economy, when those rates crash, then the lending rates themselves are also moderated. And therefore, that avenue for crowding out has not yet been activated. Finally, in terms of response, the issue which has been from the very beginning of this debate has always been the one we threw on the argument. Our borders. Whatever we are doing here, our borders are, we cannot police our borders. If we have a failure of governance, that is their problem. Part of the function of a government properly constituted is to be able to secure its borders. So if we cannot secure our borders, if we cannot, ensure that goods that we have here are not just taken across the border freely, then that is a matter of the collapse of governance. And we need to address that issue of governance. But even beyond that, all the land borders that we have, Benin, Niger, Cameroon and all that, the total consumption of products that those people have is still a minuscule proportion of the total Nigerian consumption. So if that is what is driving, I'm not saying that it's not party to it, but let us not over-dramatize that out of these so many million barrels, liters that we are saying we consume, or 90% of it is outside. It's not, because the petroleum consumption in Nigeria vis-a-vis those borders or those countries that border us taken together, is we can look at the figures and discover that will not be what is swamping us. So I think that we need to pay attention to some of our circumstances and use them in seeking for the solutions that we want to put on board. And so I think, like I said at the beginning, we need to take certain steps before we are able to take some of these policies on board. One, we need to ensure that we have domestic refining capacity. And why I keep emphasizing this is this. Apart from just the issue of the petroleum sector, I'm a general equilibrium person. I'm not a sectoral analysis person. The petroleum sector is one sector, but I'm interested in the overall Nigerian economy. If we want to look at the general equilibrium, the general issues, the general economy, we need to be able to create a situation that will bring stability to the economy. When you import products and you throw it to the market, what you are doing is that you destroy the naira. The value of the naira today is terribly impacted upon by the amount that we spend importing petroleum products. When, therefore, the instability in the foreign exchange will contaminate the general economy. and we need to be able to take steps that will reduce that pressure on the foreign exchange. And that major pressure is coming from importation of petroleum products. So let us refine domestically. If we refine domestically, I'm not saying that it can still be the same price as the global price, but it will not require demand for foreign exchange in order to have it. Then you bring some stability into the economy. These are some of the things that we need to take and investigate properly before we run into generalized policies that because it's done in this country, do it like that. Because in other countries, you are able to say tax petroleum products so that people will use less of this environmental and friendly energy. Then we do it here. You do it here and do what? You break your legs, then you are breaking the legs of the economy. And those cannot be the way to.
Can I just respond? I'm just absolutely appalled. The Mondale Fleming talks about the general equilibrium model, and I'm very familiar with that. And it's indeed looking at the broader economy that has made me to say that you cannot sustain this 7.3 trillion and all the other trillions that we have spent. Okay? So it is not only in the petroleum sector, this is additive to what we are already doing. So it's this notion that until everything works, that until everything I have, the trains are working, before you begin to take fiscal steps, we will continue to, I said between 2006 and 2018, okay, we have pushed forward this whole notion that, okay, once we get all the refineries to work, once we get this to work, once we get that to work, you are piling on debt. Okay? And it is that piling on of debt that is resulting in the devaluation of the currency, because fiscally you earn, and every Nigerian understands this. Every month people balance their budgets. Okay? And the state must begin to live within its means. It must begin to live within its means. So it is just simple. It is a very, very simple thing. Remove the incentive to, or you balance the budget. It's simple. So you have to find the 4 trillion, and it's real money, not ways and means, not printing the money, because that is what affects inflation. But you need to be able to do that, so you balance the budget. It's a choice that the government needs to make. If subsidy is more important, and in your view it is, okay, then find a way to close the fiscal gap. That's all.
Okay, what Dr. Peters also mentioned was about refining locally. You're a petroleum economist. I really want to know why it is difficult for us to refine locally, despite the amounts that have been earmarked for turnaround maintenances and for different things around refineries in the last few years. Why is it difficult to refine fuels here?
First, let me say it is important not to create, whether it's a public monopoly or a private monopoly, to have in a particular sector like this is. You must allow the market to function. The market will function if I can sell my product at any price I want to sell it, and it is profitable to do so. So again, why are there no private? If you look at the Dangote refinery, it's essentially an export refinery. It's going to sell it at an export market price, export parity, okay, to Nigeria. The refineries that the NNPCs currently has, basically subsidy had crept into the refinery system. So except we isolate it completely and make sure that the refinery refines and then sells at export parity, and that the subsidy is at the pump, then of course you'll be able to get funding to. Nobody funds things 100%. You have to go to a bank, get money to do these. And the government is not in a position to actually do these fundings. Maybe you would have recognized that last year there was a lot of debate about the Dangote refinery and funding issues, etc., etc. You need the banks to understand the business model. But if a business model says that I can buy the crude for a specific amount, okay, and then sell my products at 1/3 the value, please, you are not going to get any banker to line up with you to give you money to do that. What happens with some of what has just happened in Imo State, for example, is that of course the crude is stolen. Then you can actually operate on that basis. And what I was at NTA on this particular issue, and I said these operations are not up to par. They don't meet the standards. And look at the consequence: 109 young men. So the fiscal environment and we must adhere to these market principles. If not, you will get reputable people to come and invest. There is nothing wrong with investing in Nigeria. Beyond all the cloud of talk and all that, if the fiscal environment is okay, people will come here to build refineries. And that is pure and simple. It's an incentive. This is a big market. I agree with him that the market is a significant one, 200 million people. Okay? And why should a country like this be queuing up or lacking petroleum products, etc.? There is something that is not right. That is the reason. It's not because people don't like Nigeria, they don't want to come here to invest. They are willing to invest if we remove price controls. That's right. If I can't make money in refining, I'm not going to come here. There is no amount of pleading.
Okay. Dr. Ozoesa, a lot of issues have been raised here, and I hope we'll just have more time, but we're gradually coasting to the end of the program. If we take a look at what also Doctor has said, which I mentioned earlier, the government is borrowing now. There's a fiscal deficit of 7.35 trillion naira. The government is borrowing to pay subsidies. The government is borrowing to pay salaries. We're supposed to have a revenue potential, if you adjust it to GDP, about 15 to 20%. Nigeria's revenue potential is about 7% of the 15 to 20% which we're doing, and we're spending about 12%. So if you minus 12 minus 7, you're getting the 5% is almost like borrowed. What should we do now? We are borrowing to pay. We are borrowing to pay subsidy. When Labour or those agitating for leave the subsidy, will they also tilt and see how much economic sense it makes? Do I understand what you're saying too?
Just a minute. You see, we are citizens of this country, and we need to face the truth as they confront us. The fiscal imbalance, which has painted very, I cannot disagree with. There's clearly a fiscal imbalance.
Yes.
But this origin and source of that fiscal imbalance is what I think we have not yet engaged properly. If we go back and look at the evolution of the subsidy matter, it started first as a concession on the price of crude, which is for domestic consumption. That's how it started. In which, instead of the global market of crude of so many dollars per barrel, we say we will peg then at first it was 350 or so thousand barrels a day. And we charge that, was it at $12 then? That's the way it started. Then when refining domestically collapsed, then NNPC continued to take that quantity, but at that guaranteed price. And so the price difference between the global market and that guaranteed price was what was used to fund subsidy. That's how it. But right now, the fiscal imbalance we are dealing with is not just from the expenditure side alone. It is the collapse of the revenue side. What has happened to our crude oil? Crude oil, even OPEC quota, we are unable to meet. Crude oil is stolen in different ways. We have had reports before of so many shiploads of Nigerian crude oil not being accounted for. Nobody gets to the bottom of it. Then more recently, we are finding that even the pipes through which the crude oil goes, people are now able to break into them and steal our crude. So that we are increasingly not even able to export what the OPEC quota would have allowed us to do. This is a period in which the global price of crude is rising. So inbuilt into the concept before was an automatic self-adjusting mechanism. If the price of crude is rising, and therefore the price of products is rising, and therefore the subsidy implied is rising, the mechanism for paying for it was that rise in the price of crude. It's an automatic optimizing mechanism that was there before. But that is broken down. And we must start asking our citizens, is our government capable? A government that cannot guarantee the safety of our crude delivery to the delivery point. Is it really a government? These are questions we should be asking as citizens. Okay. So if we want to address this matter properly, it is not the scratching we are doing on subsidy or revenue, fiscal imbalance. It is the totality. What is happening to our revenue? Why are we not able to sustain the revenue profile that we used to be able to sustain? What is happening to our crude? These are questions that we need to be asking.
Okay, we just have about 3 minutes to the end of the show. Dr. Okona, I would like you perhaps, if you have any response to that, you can. Then I would like you to take a look at the outlook of the PIA moving forward now, especially with this thing, 4 trillion naira for this year, apparently. I don't know how that will bring in new investment. And I would also like you to respond to the fact that a lot of people have also told me here that, Nancy, if your guests are saying they should remove subsidy, it's an elitist conversation. Those that can afford buying fuel at 300, 500 are the ones saying, take off subsidy. What do you have to say about that?
Well, really the footprint of the well-to-do in terms of the energy consumption is much more than the footprint of the poor. So subsidy in itself benefits those who have 5 cars in the garage at home, and every kid goes to school in a different car, and the people who want. So my position is quite simple. Where markets play a significant role, then arbitrage does not exist, or arbitrage is minimized. Where you have free market conditions and you do not have these interventions, or whether you want to fix the price of crude at $12 and then the difference you used to pay for subsidy. How did you arrive at $12? You just took it out of the air. You know, the most important thing is that the price of crude ought to be reflected in the price of products. And I can give you the equations that would give you what the price of products would be. That is available, and it can be demonstrated. So it is just important to state again, Nigeria doesn't fix the price of crude oil. Its production, these days even less than 2% it once was. So our influence on the international price of crude is not as significant as it used to be. Nigeria could potentially, just like Indonesia, become a crude importing country. If you continue to have population growth, demand for energy, and so on and so forth, and with the way in which we are managing the midstream and downstream, you could end up in the situation of Indonesia. Where would you import something and then continue the subsidy regime? We need a market-led reform in the economy, and that is it's essential, because individuals, companies, etc., would make profitable decisions, and we will grow employment. Right now, we're having more and more unemployment because factories are closing, but if they have an opportunity to be in productive ventures, we will see a transformation. Where is the PIA headed? Well, the PIA is quite clear. It does not set a price for, it doesn't give either the minister or anyone the powers to set a price for petroleum products. So what is happening now, essentially a Section 64 event, in my view, which is basically saying in an emergency that the national oil company can step in, and it will do so and be compensated for doing so. That's why I said I'm not making NNPC the whipping boy. It's acting on instructions. Okay? The instruction is that under Section 64, if NNPC is asked, then it goes ahead to do what the government is asking and is compensated for. So that is the position. But going forward, I think the investment climate would be clear to all that the provisions, and I think this intervention is not very helpful, because it's not allowing for that process to quickly take place, for people to now make those decisions.
Okay. Thank you very much to you both for coming on the show today and lending your voices. This is one crucial conversation that we must have as a country and as Nigerians. I've been speaking with Dr. Peter Azoreson, the former General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Thank you very much, Doctor, for coming. And Dr. Tim Okon, petroleum economist and the former STA, Social Technical Advisor to Dr. Ebe Kachuku, former Minister of State for Petroleum Resources. Thank you, Dr. Okon, for coming. That's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. Please keep that conversation ongoing. You can check us out on all our social media platforms. Be the best you can be and be that change that you want to see. I am Nancy Najib. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye now. Ongoing. You can check us out on all